And you're trying to give the young people something that will help them. Yet you don't know exactly what it ought to be.
As always, thanks for tuning into the podcast. My name is Drew Perkins. I'm the director of TeachThought Professional Development, and if you're listening to this podcast in any timely fashion from when it was published, we hope that you're coping well with the fallout from the coronavirus, which has affected schools and teaching and learning around the world, as we see teachers and schools and parents trying to replicate some version of normalcy via online platforms. So we have certainly been affected. Our PBL Hilton Head workshop was rescheduled to September 21st through 23rd, and we sure hope things are back to normal by then. And also for our PBL Grow 20 event in June in Louisville. More information on those, of course, can be found at wegrowteachers.com, and you can click on the Public Workshops tab up near the top. We certainly hope to bring you more podcasts and maybe even do some online hosting of forums for discussion around how we might navigate this really bizarre and difficult time. And just a side note, we have been working on an online platform for online learning for quite some time and trying to get that right, and this, of course, has accelerated that. So we're just about ready to release some online PBL workshops that would be for leadership and for teachers, as well as probably some culture of inquiry workshops as well. So as we work out the details on those to deliver what we feel is valuable and worthwhile, please check out wegrowteachers.com and or subscribe to the newsletter so you can be updated if you are so inclined to join us for one of those. We do hope you're staying safe and remaining healthy and following the guidelines that have been set out by most government leaders and healthcare leaders, probably more importantly, healthcare leaders, in that you are socially distancing and keeping yourself from undue contact with others in an effort to stop the spread of coronavirus that would affect any and all of our population. So please be smart and stay home whenever and wherever you can. In this podcast episode, I spoke with Sarah Gilmore and Katierose Deos, who joined me from separate locations, but both in Germany, to talk about their new book called Integrating Technology, a School-Wide Framework to Enhance Learning. Certainly an interesting conversation in the context of our current shutdown of schools and lots of online distance learning because of the coronavirus. So we talked a lot about how teachers might be leveraging technology and use technology to connect with their students via the internet and other tech tools, and as well as thinking about how parents might engage as well, and the necessity of using technology maybe helping to push forward some of the innovations that our physical face-to-face school settings might gain from. We also touched on some of the main pieces of their book, which are around the communication and collaboration and construction of understanding, as well as some of the frameworks for assessment and how leaders might think about integrating technology and some of the important questions and pieces there, as well as some of the tech tools that might be helpful for assessment and other uses in teaching and learning. So I really appreciate the way that these two think about teaching and learning and technology of integration, and enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully it's helpful for you both in this current context as well as assuming we get back to a more regular face-to-face school teaching and learning setting as well. Sarah and Katierose, welcome to the podcast. Happy to have you on, both of you connecting virtually as the rest of the world seems to be doing at this point with coronavirus concerns. We're dating this evergreen podcast. So I want to give you an opportunity to say hello and introduce yourselves, give our listeners a little bit of background on who you are and I guess the work that you've done and how you've come to writing the book that we're going to talk about, which is called Integrating Technology, a School-Wide Framework to Enhance Learning. So, Sarah, let's start with you first.
Hi, I'm Sarah Gilmore. I'm from Scotland originally, but I now have a really messed up accent because I've been living abroad for a long time and my husband is American. I started teaching in Scotland and moved to Germany 11 years ago. And I work with Katierose at Berlin International School, where I'm the EdTech integration coach and primary ICT leader. And that's where we started working together and ultimately how we started writing the book.
Okay, Katierose.
Hello. Yes, my name's Katierose Deos, and I grew up and got my teaching degree and started teaching in the States. And then I started teaching abroad in several places and landed as well in Berlin and have been here for 13 years working at Berlin International School. And as Sarah said, we kind of met there, and she was in the tech coach kind of role, and I was in the curriculum coordinator role. And through that professional relationship, we just kind of kept seeing the same concerns popping up, the same questions being asked. And then we started traveling and doing workshops and working with other teachers from other schools. And we noticed that there was a lot of commonalities that we were seeing. And we thought, okay, these are questions that everyone is kind of grappling with right now. So what can we do about it? And we started writing.
Right, and this is, as we were talking before we started recording, a really interesting time for use of technology in teaching and learning because there are lots of schools around the world, I'm assuming, that are no longer meeting face-to-face because of the coronavirus, and lots of parents who are being tasked with trying to play the role of a teacher, and I'm assuming that many of those parents are being somewhat forced to engage with technology, perhaps differently. So definitely want to talk about that, but also then thinking about how that technology integration lives in actual face-to-face, because I'm assuming the apocalypse will be over at some point. When that is, we'll get back to
so.
Right. We'll get back to face and thinking about use of technology. So
that's a lot there, Drew. That is a lot. Those are like 10 questions in one.
Right. Yeah, there's no questions there yet, but yeah, it's such a really strange time to be thinking about this. So I have a master's of integrating technology in the classroom many years ago that honestly was not done particularly well. I didn't find it to be particularly valuable, but at that point I had to get a master's to keep my certificate, and I did it through Walden University. And I remember one of my master's level assignments being that I was supposed to take copy and paste an image into a Word document and then duplicate it in some way, modify it, like change the color or something like that. And I remember thinking at that time, and I'm going to date myself, so this was early 2000s, and thinking this doesn't seem like master's level kind of work. But it was, I was at that point traveling quite a bit with kids. There's a program, I don't know if you all have heard of it, called People to People, where we took kids overseas to Australia and then Europe. That was the last time I was actually in Germany, was as part of that, and then British Isles, where I visited Scotland of all places. So I was sort of engaging in that program out of necessity in lots of ways, but I do think that integrating technology is a really important piece of the teaching and learning puzzle. What is your, I guess, can you both share with us what is your, I guess, training or education in using technology, or how much of it is just through use of and working in the actual schools?
Well, it's funny, one of the things that teachers tend to assume, and even the teachers at our school tend to assume, that I have been trained in technology integration, and I haven't. I did music, classical music undergrad, and then I did my primary PGDE in Scotland, which is your kind of master's level teaching certificate, and then I have a master's in educational leadership and management. But everything that I've learned about technology integration has just come from practice, doing it in the classroom and trying to learn about it. I use Google a lot, in front of teachers when they kind of come to me with problems, because that's how you do it, really, is just by trying to learn about it. And I'm really upfront with everybody about that, because I don't think teachers should think that the only way you can be good at using technology is if you've had, special training. With the technology that we have in the classroom, anybody, can be a quote unquote techie person. It's really designed for user friendliness. You just have to kind of want to.
And I think when we think about the message that we want to send to kids is that, you had talked about preparing kids for the modern world and what that looks like. And we have no idea what that looks like, or how that's going to be structured, or what systems are going to be in place. But what we do know is that our students need to be flexible within it. And so that kind of flexibility with technology tools comes from using a wide variety. And for us as teachers, we don't have to know how to use all of these tools perfectly. What we need to know how to do is we need to know how to plan good lessons, good units of study for kids, and integrate technology in a way that enhances their understanding of the technology, their understanding of the concepts within those lessons, and helps them perfect their skills. So that way, when they are heading out into this modern world, they can then make informed choices about what is their purpose, their goal in that certain position or setting or job, and then what tools am I going to use to achieve that.
And I think as well, an important part of it is teaching them, modeling a willingness to take risks and to potentially fail, and in so much of what we do in the classroom, we do things that don't work. We plan lessons that didn't quite hit the mark, and, stuff gets canceled because of fire drills and football tournaments and all the rest of it. And we kind of take it in our stride most of the time as teachers. But somehow when you kind of introduce technology into the mix, there's this extra level of stress and anxiety that a lot of teachers kind of bring with them to that. And being good at technology, quote unquote, is just about being willing to try it. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And kind of modeling for the kids that that's okay. Because like Katierose said, we don't know what the future is going to look like, but flexibility is going to be key. And so is the ability to, iterate and reiterate, try and fail and try again, because technology changes just so fast.
Yeah, it's interesting. Your book, I think, hits on several things that resonate with me. And one of the things that I have found interesting in our work, and we do almost all of our work is pedagogy specific and through the lens of inquiry. And we actually have stopped offering technology integration workshops specifically, in part because there wasn't much of a demand for them, and I'm curious your experience in that. But we also think about, and your book I think hits on this as well, sort of the idea that it is really about purpose, and so for teachers or schools to think about technology first and purpose or pedagogy second is not really something that we are or were interested in doing. And so we think about integrating technology as part of the pedagogy pieces. And I suppose that, the very first chapter that you talk about is that purposeful technology integration. And I guess I know you do this in the book, but can you give us sort of the snapshot of what you mean by technology integration?
Sure. So when we're talking about technology, and what Sarah's going to do now is she's going to listen to what I'm going to say, and then she's going to chime in after, and she's just going to put such a shine on this. You'll see. so, so when we talk about like purposeful technology integration, it's kind of the opposite of almost what we're seeing right now. Right now, what we're seeing within this corona crisis, so to speak, is that everyone's jumping on the how am I going to do this and the what am I going to do. How am I going to do it? What am I going to do? What apps should I use? What platform should I use? How am I going to do it? Through the book, the book is much more of a holistic picture, big, long-term picture of technology in schools. And we ask schools and teachers and administrators and districts to kind of pull away from that for a moment and talk about the why. Why are we integrating technology into our schools? Why is that important? Why is it important to our students? What does that mean for us as a school? Because redefining what the purpose of integration is going to give it the longevity that it needs to kind of sustain within the ever-changing schools. But right now, we're really focused on the how and the what, as we have to be in this moment. But the hope is that as we pull out of this crisis and kids are back in the classroom and teachers are back in the classroom, that this is kind of acted as like an upskilling course for teachers in a way, because they're starting to have to use platforms that they normally maybe wouldn't. And they're having to engage with students and collaborate and facilitate that collaboration and communication in a different way. And so now they're kind of getting upskilled. And when we go back in the classroom now, the real conversation is going to be like, okay, so now how are we going to take what we've done there and incorporate it into the classroom in a way that is intentional and that is purposeful to enhance the learning of the students?
Katierose, you want to put some shine on that?
Well, I think that was very shiny. That was really good. No, but I just was going to add that, in the most sort of basic sense of the definition, it's just about seeing technology integration is about seeing technology as a tool to enhance learning and then embedding that into how we teach and how we run our classrooms to remove barriers and create opportunities. So there are a lot of things that we do in our classrooms because that's how we've always done them. But if we were to imagine an ideal teaching environment, or an ideal teaching situation, what is it that we would want to do? Like in an ideal world, would you love to be able to hear every single one of your students read aloud every week? Yes. Is that manageable in most classrooms? Maybe not. But if we integrate technology into the way that we run the classroom, that might become manageable because technology allows us to do something that we couldn't do before. So for us, it's really about finding that purpose and about, elevating and enhancing what we're doing with our kids through the use of what is fundamentally another one of the many tools that we have. And I understand what you're saying about, stopping doing PD as kind of depressing as I find it, that, there's a lack of, or there has previously been a lack of interest or a lack of demand, because the amount of technology that we have in our classrooms, even though there are areas of the country, the US in particular, which are woefully under-resourced, and it's so sad that there's this inequity. But the amount of money that we're spending globally on technology is astronomical, and it goes up every single year. If we don't make an effort to address how we're using that technology in the classroom, that is money wasted. That is time wasted. That is space wasted. We have to really invest the time and the energy into addressing what the purpose of having that technology is in the first place and how we use it to enhance teaching.
Yeah, it's really, so what I've found, or at least I think anecdotally is true in my intuition, is that many schools have some technology integration person in-house. So those people might be people who are really good at helping with connections and troubleshooting and those kinds of things, but maybe not pedagogically sound, or that's not their strength. You might have some people in-house who are pedagogically sound, but are maybe a little weaker in the connection and, the technical stuff. And then there's probably a certain number of schools that have people who are both, right? That is in-house, but that they think about technology integration differently than they would from a professional development standpoint. They think about it differently than they would about, let's say, project-based learning, which is something that we do. They don't feel like they have the internal capacity to help with that, and they're, probably right. But I do find that perhaps in the realm of offering professional development, that there are probably lots of schools and districts that put that technology integration PD at a lower priority because they feel like they have the in-house resources to do that. But it also gets at some of the mindset pieces, and I know you talk about that in your book, and I think this is a really interesting piece. It's not new, certainly, the digital immigrants and digital natives kinds of things, but I find it, so I come from a long line of educators. My grandmother was a teacher, my mother was a teacher and a principal, and a very good one. I was in her classroom, but she does not have a mindset that is indicative of being a digital native, right? So she's afraid she's going to break things by clicking on the wrong button or whatever, virtual button. And the younger mindset and the more digital native mindset is one that is just intuitively going to click on things and doesn't have that sense that they're going to break things. And so I'm wondering how you see that or have seen that mindset approach with the sort of spectrum of teachers, and I'm wondering how that is affecting how the teachers are being asked to, I guess, their efficacy in being able to conduct business anywhere close to being as normal or effective in this environment now, where they sort of are being forced, as you said, the necessity of maybe having to innovate or use some of these tools. And I'm wondering how that mindset that you've seen is maybe affecting this.
Well, mindset's one of those really interesting things that we, you and I and those of us who work in technology definitely recognize is a huge factor in how people integrate technology, and the extent to which and the effectiveness with which they integrate technology. And there's a lot of research to back that up, not just about technology, but in general, how our beliefs affect our practice. And I think one of the things that's really missing in professional development is the space to talk about what your mindset is and to realize what your mindset is and where it comes from. Because a lot of teacher mindset about technology, particularly the more negative side of things, comes from a very understandable, relatable set of experiences. In terms of age of the average teacher, most teachers are over the age of 45 in the US, and Katierose and I are about 10 years younger than that, if we're being generous. And our experience of working with technology or learning with technology up until we started kind of doing it in this capacity was really, really limited. And so the majority of teachers have even less experience than we do of being taught how to use technology, access to technology, and they have no experience of learning with technology in the way that they're being asked to. And so you have that component, you have any kind of aspects about kind of cultural or contextual pieces, the bad experiences everybody has had with technology not working in their classrooms. It definitely does affect how they do it, but also has been until now very much a sense that it was optional. It's a nice to have, if you're kind of going above and beyond, if you choose to do it. And so for the people who haven't felt terribly keen for very understandable reasons, there has been that really built-in opt-out mechanism until now. And I do think that, like Katierose said, this has been a kind of forced upskilling for a lot of teachers. And I feel really bad for all of those teachers out there who until now haven't had access, haven't been supported, or have chosen to opt out and are now finding themselves in a really, really, really stressful situation. My heart goes out to them. And I just hope that after this all ends, there can be a positive from that this kind of necessary skilling up will have happened. And then we can go beyond it and we can take a step further and start to use the technology in a more meaningful way,
And I think, too, within the book, we kind of frame the book and our thinking around the Intechgrate model. And that includes 6 pieces. And mindset is one of them. But you also have resources, leadership, pedagogy, curriculum, and purpose. And all 6 of these, work together in different capacities at different times. And so a lot of the teacher mindset that exists out there is a product of one of these pieces, maybe not necessarily being supported. For instance, if you've got a lot of resources, but your school really hasn't articulated a purpose for them, then it leaves you as a teacher kind of swimming, wondering what to do, how to do it. If you have a good curriculum, but your infrastructure can't support that curriculum, then again, you're left kind of waffling in the air. And so I think there are a lot of contributing factors to each teacher's individual mindset, but it also comes down to recognizing that all of these pieces are important and they all need to be managed and they all need to be a part of the conversation about integrating technology in a school, but they all can't be. It's kind of impossible to have all of these pieces at the same place at the same time. Our plate isn't big enough as school leaders, as teachers, to balance all of that and everything else that's going on. And so we just got to know that they're going in the same direction. The conversations need to be happening so we all know what our purpose is. And if we can follow that and all the other pieces can continue to kind of inch along with it, then we're going to get somewhere. But I think sometimes, too, pieces are just kind of left behind, or tons of money is poured in, but then we don't really look at how we're organizing that in the bigger picture of things.
Yeah.
Well, that's where also it's a kind of a false economy to rely on the kind of in-house tech integration person to do all of the development or PD, because that person's role and their focus is pedagogical, and that's as it should be. Their role is on how you're using the technology tools in the classroom, and hopefully that's happening at a high level. But what their focus isn't and can't be is the other 5 components that we have in the Intechgrate model. And if we aren't addressing those in some capacity, there's only so far that pedagogy can ever go if we don't also, like Katierose said, address curriculum, address mindset, leadership, resources. We have to do all of that. And you can't rely on, the sometimes part-time or voluntary, or even if they're full-time, they're a teacher. That's not their role. That's why, PD really has to take into consideration this whole thing and not just that teaching portion.
Yeah, we're big believers and try to work with all of our PD clients and schools and leadership around that idea of purpose and mission and vision, and being really clear about that, because to your point, if you don't have that true north or whatever that guiding principle, those guiding principles clearly outlined, you don't know what you're shooting for, and that is just a recipe for not good at best, not good use of integration of technology in this case, but at worst could be really, really, really bad. And I like how you've segmented the book talking about pedagogy and thinking about it in enhancing student communication, and then student collaboration, and planning, scaffolding, and integrating technology. If we are to think about this and extrapolate it to the current situation with lots of teachers trying to teach digitally and do that work, what are some of the pieces, and maybe you're engaging in this as well in your work, are you recommending, or what are the tips and things that we should say teachers who are trying to teach from distance using technology at this point should and could engage with and engage in?
Like Katierose said earlier, at the moment, there's very much a sense of a lot of focus on the tools, because people are very rapidly trying to upskill. Everyone's like, how do I log into Zoom? What is Seesaw? This kind of thing. And I think that's completely understandable. For the first, week or two, there's a huge learning curve there for everybody to go through just to get kind of online and get going with any kind of virtual classroom. But what's really important is that we have to then make a real effort to move the conversation forward from tool to purpose. And what we talk about in our approach to scaffolding and planning teaching with technology is beginning from identifying the core learning. So this is as applicable whether you're in, a physical classroom or a virtual classroom. You've got your tools, you've got everything there, and you have to think to yourself, what is it that I actually want my children to learn? Not what did I want them to do? So for example, I was having a conversation with our music teacher about this the other day, and he was saying, I just don't know how to do this. We were supposed to be preparing for the graduation concert. I was like, okay, well, what was the learning objective? What did you want them to learn, not to do? Well, it was performance skills. Okay, well, we can do that. We can't prepare for the graduation performance, but we can prepare a performance, And so thinking about what it is that you actually want to get out at the end of all of this, your core learning goal, and then outlining the process that you want to use to get there. At the end, we're going to have a performance, but before then, we're going to have to choose pieces. We're going to have to practice. We're going to have check-ins. We're going to have feedback. Then you're going to plan and scaffold. What am I going to need to provide for the students for them to be able to be successful in that process? And then if you're in the classroom, we have this portion of troubleshooting and trying out. So when you're using technology for the first time, ideally not when you're kind of forced to in your living room for the foreseeable future, but when you're actually in your school, you can troubleshoot and try it out. And then you just have to go through it and then reflecting, on how did it go? What can we do better next time? But I think that's what we have to then get from is this focus on tools is understandable and temporary. And then we have to shift our focus back to the basics. What do we want our students to learn? And how can I use the technology in the best possible way to help us get to that goal?
And in this situation specifically, I think teachers, to take a deep breath and know that less is more right now. We're not just sending kids assignments because they're home sick. There's actually like a huge worldwide crisis going on, and kids are also trying to digest all of that. And what does that mean? And why can't I go to the playground? And how come I have to stay away from people at the store and all this kind of stuff? And so they need time to work through all of that. While at the same time, they do need to have some academic learning happening. And so when you are planning activities and learning engagements for your kids, really focus on that core learning and create learning engagements that have depth and that have quality. And with that, we really highlight collaboration and communication, because those are the two pieces that will not only help students share their ideas, co-construct understanding, which is super important, but they're also the two pieces that will help you maintain a sense of community with your class throughout this crisis. They're not there in the classroom together, but you can organize learning engagements where they have to collaborate or where they have to communicate with each other that will help build and maintain that sense of community, which is going to be really important, especially because we don't actually know how long this is all going to last. And that uncertainty can be very uncomfortable for kids. And so making sure that we're kind of giving them opportunities through their learning to connect and co-construct that understanding, I think is really important.
Yeah, the idea that we are trying to focus on doing everything that we thought we were doing in physical classrooms, and I would argue that, and I use that term think we're doing, because I think that lots of teaching happens, but not necessarily learning. But that idea of less is more, I think, is actually something that we should be taking back to our physical classrooms, assuming that this apocalypse, corona apocalypse ends, right? And we've made that point in our professional development, and I've had conversations with, I don't know if you all are familiar with Richard DeFore, who's sort of famous for PLC work, but he passed away a few years ago from terminal cancer, and we talked on the podcast before that in his last book, which was called In Praise of American Educators, which was, again, very much about PLCs, but I think the lessons and the thinking apply to other things, including technology integration, but just teaching and learning in general. And that's the idea that, and his statement was something like, if we're going to guarantee a viable curriculum to our students, we're going to have to choose priority standards or things to teach, and elect not to teach other things, which of course is some heresy. But the idea that we go slow to go fast, or that less is more, I think is something that is transferable, and hopefully maybe there are some lessons we're learning here as we go back to the more traditional in-person classrooms. I think the communication and collaboration and the construction of meaning and focusing on inquiry and how do we help students form questions, and technology, there's lots of ways to do that. Are there things that you have seen either before this coronavirus fallout or during it that you would say are examples or let's say non-examples where you say, this is not what we want to be doing in an online environment?
Well, Katierose and I are big fans of going of going deeper, doing less more deeply in general. But we're also big fans of teaching more than one thing at the same time where it makes sense. For example, it isn't necessary to teach a lesson on typing and teach a lesson on, let's say, story writing, for example. Those are two things that can be done one through the other. You learn to type through writing, for example, or through taking notes, or it isn't necessary to teach, or I would say kind of desirable to teach coding necessarily as a standalone skill and then separately teach sequencing and instructional writing. Those are three things that can all be taught at the same time, giving context and meaning to skills. So I think one of the things that we used to see a lot of, all of us, not Katierose and I specifically, but with using technology, was this very, very technology as a discipline, skill-focused, standalone, we're going to go to the ICT lab and we're going to do typing, we're going to do word processing, that kind of thing. And then we're going to go away and then we're not going to think about technology again until next Tuesday at 11. And I think we think very strongly that that's not how we should be using technology anymore. We don't, go to the English lab to use pencils. It's a tool that we use in our learning. And so for us, that's a really big shift, is this idea of recognizing that we're using the technology in context, and this idea that you can be teaching, with, through, and about technology all at the same time. So that, like you said, the curriculum is overcrowded. We can't teach all of these things one after the other in the depth that they deserve. So certainly part of it is looking at what is obsolete, what do we not actually need to be teaching anymore, but we just kind of teach out of habit. But part of it is also seeing where are the overlaps, that when we can do skills, knowledge, and understanding on top of one another, that gives it real world meaning.
I would also just add that just in these last few days, our school has reached out to us to talk to us specifically about feedback, because now the feedback that teachers are giving is right there in front of all of us. The feedback that they're giving to students about their work, and they've assigned lots of tasks, and all of these tasks they feel expect the students to get feedback on. And so it's been a very interesting conversation as we've moved through these past couple of days of talking about, okay, well, what is feedback? What does it look like? And what's the purpose of feedback? And that's connected to a deeper conversation about, okay, well, when we're in the classroom, what's teaching and what's learning? And how do we support students to actually learn with the use of feedback? And so it's interesting how these kinds of topics as well are cropping up because of the situation at the moment that we really hope will carry over. We had hoped to talk to our school almost over a year and a half ago about feedback specifically, but it kept getting pushed aside, and now it's just bubbled up to the top of the surface because here we are in this moment where we realize, oh wow, we have very different definitions of what effective feedback is, and we're not sure how to move forward from here.
And we can't put it off any longer. Now we have to address it.
Right. So what's your opinion of sort of online courses. Well, that's one of the things that we have been, I think I mentioned, working on as for quite some time, because we want to be able to do it well. And it's that work has been accelerated as we think about how we might do more online professional development, at least in the short term, in place of some of the face-to-face and that kind of thing. But one of the I think the distinctions is in some of the sort of online courses, which I don't know if you have an experience or even real thoughts about, is the idea of sort of the online courses that are self-guided, that there's not any sort of teacher or facilitator or instructor interaction, that it's sort of this sort of 6-week thing that you sign up for, or 1-week thing, versus something that is more interactive, and there are those conversations and that feedback and some assessment pieces, which, and I also do want to talk about some of the assessment tools and the ways in which we can use technology to assess students formatively and summatively, but I want to come back to that. So do you have any real, do you see any real value in some of those online courses that are self-guided, or do you feel like it's much more valuable or important to have some of that instructor feedback and collaboration and peer feedback and conversation?
Well,
Go ahead, Katierose.
Funny you should mention that, because I'm actually in the throes of doing a primary, it's through the IB, a primary years program, self-paced upskilling course for the IB, and I have to say that there is, for me personally, there's a much greater sense of nonchalance with it, because I just need to get through it in the next 6 weeks, and they are just, there's no one there really asking questions, getting my feedback, and then coming back at me to justify any of my answers or my ideas. And so for me, I've found it to be a way to consume information. Like, I am reading, I am gathering information, but when I really think about how I myself create a deeper understanding of what I'm reading, it doesn't come from more reading for me. It really comes with conversation, having to organize my ideas or my new learning and then present that to someone else. And so within this course specifically, I can just say from my own experience that if I were to facilitate something like a self-paced course, it would definitely be coupled with something else, much more either face-to-face or an active online platform, because I've found that while I'm gaining the knowledge, I don't think the depth of the knowledge has the quality that it should. I don't know if that's helpful, but
Katierose, anything you'd like to add there?
Well, I'm Sarah, but
I'm sorry. You sound
okay.
You sound similar enough. I mixed that up.
No problem. No, I just agree with Katierose. I mean, it's purely an opinion thing. It's not based on any research per se, but we've been thinking about doing an online course based on our book, and I definitely see the logistical issues around having it be more interactive, because obviously then you have, you got to have your cohorts, you've got to have start dates, the group size, all of this kind of thing. But, I would still go for a more kind of real world learning kind of situation with the communication, collaboration portions, because like Katierose, I feel like there's a limit to how much you can kind of do when it's just your own ideas bouncing around inside your own brain. There's definitely also that accountability thing and like you'd said, the kind of the urgency of it, when you're just kind of working through it in your own time. But no,
I said nonchalance. I said nonchalance.
Well, I said urgency. I can't believe you're managing to be doing this on top of everything else as well. I'm so impressed. But yeah, no, I would not enjoy a self-paced kind of alone thing personally.
Yeah, I think and I've had conversation about sort of micro-credentials and badges, which doesn't seem to be something that's not terribly interesting to me, but I do get that there are people who find that interesting, and maybe there's a mindset difference there of how we think about knowledge, and I like how you said construction of understanding. You didn't say construction of knowledge, and I'm assuming that there's some intentionality there because there is a difference. And as you think about, let's say if we want to deliver a short 1-week course on driving questions in project-based learning, I think I can reasonably design a course that would deliver that knowledge. There might be some quizzes that you could pull in there that would check for understanding, and they could self-check. But in the end, the missing piece for me personally, and how I like to learn, and like it sounds like the two of you have kind of said, is having some conversation and dialogue around that to explore the intricacies and complexities of those pieces and ask questions and hear other people's questions. And so as we think about delivering workshops, which I have made a distinction between workshops and courses online, courses being more that delivery of knowledge, sort of the self-paced kinds of things, and making sure that people get either a pass-fail or grade, that they are being held accountable for demonstrating understanding. Whereas in a workshop, we certainly expect that the participants are gaining an understanding or checking for understanding, but we're not saying if you don't demonstrate mastery to 80% at the end of this workshop, you don't get credit or PD credit or something like that. So the pieces I think are different, and it is a very interesting, as we think about delivering a workshop online. Some of the tools, like, I don't know if you're familiar with Explain Everything. I think we're going to use that, because that collaborative whiteboard piece where you can see each other's thinking and talk through things, Zoom or Hangouts or Skype or things like that, where you can hear each other's, but then Google Docs or something that allows you to see and collaborate and, as you said, sort of construct that meaning. And I think that there's a real delicate balance there. Are there some favorite tools that you all have for online collaboration and construction of meaning, and especially, I had mentioned earlier, some of those assessment tools?
Well, on top of the ones you mentioned there, I'm a big fan of Mentimeter. Have you tried that?
No, I haven't heard that.
Mentimeter's cool because it's got a lot. It's kind of like sort of like live online presentation kind of side of things, but you can also then get people, you give them a code and they can submit words that can then add to a collaborative word cloud. That's a really great way of I think that could be a great way of doing a kind of formative assessment, kind of exit ticket, kind of what was your understanding from this? What was the big takeaway? How are you feeling? What are your big questions? Padlet's a really great one. They've expanded what they do a lot lately, and they have this one of their templates is the Connect, which lets you do collaborative mind maps. And I think there's so much potential there with collaborative mind mapping. I think that would be a really good one.
Padlet too is you can upload videos and audio and pictures, and that's a great way for people to just add another dimension to the collaborative work they can do.
Definitely. Google Forms is a great one for assessing as well, if you're looking for something for kind of quiz style of things. One I keep trying to get people to use, but it's not good for online, but I just wish everybody knew about it. Have you heard of Plickers?
Yep.
Yeah, I love Plickers, but no good for online, but everybody should try it because it's very cool. For people who are listening, it's you have these kind of they look a lot like QR codes, essentially. It's a piece of paper, and depending on which way around you turn it, that defines whether or not it's A, B, C, or D. And then the course leader can hold up their iPad. And so you hold your piece of paper up with your, oriented to A, and they can see how many people, what proportion of the people answered, A. So it's really good for kind of hinge point questioning, or again, a quick exit ticket, a quick kind of check-in of understanding, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, we'll make sure. I was not familiar with, or I am not familiar with the Mentimeter. I looked it up here. I'm assuming this is the right one, MENTIMETER.com. And we'll link to all of these that we're mentioning here in the show notes. So if folks are listening, especially most people listen on iTunes, and we can't make live links show up in iTunes, or at least I've not figured out a way to do that. So you'll have to go to either wegrowteachers.com or teachthought.com and find this episode, and it'll be in those links. But do you all think that assessment is... let me think about it. So when we think about assessment and assessment tools, and we in project-based learning workshops use a fun video, I think it's French, where there's a guy who is trying to get his wife Emma to use an iPad or some technology tool for everything. She's reading in bed and she actually has a book, and he's like, Emma, it's like, why are you doing this analog version of something that could be digital? And then at the end, he's in the restroom and doesn't have any toilet paper, and he says, Emma, and clearly wanting toilet paper, and she shoves an iPad with a picture of toilet paper underneath the door. Just to highlight that idea of, when we think about assessment, that purpose is what should be driving how we assess, and then of course the tool that we're going to assess, whether that's analog or digital. Do you find, and this kind of gets back to mindset, do you find, or have you found, that teachers who have more of a technology integration mindset think about assessment any differently, or is that pretty standard across the board, or any sort of insight there?
Well, I think you hit it on the head with having that conversation about what the purpose of assessment is, and then how are you going to communicate the information needed so that the students can then can learn from it. And so for me, I'm not sure I've noticed a difference. Those teachers who are integrating technology may as well integrate a certain tool to support the assessment that they're doing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they've thought about the purpose of the assessment in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, so put it like this, if I was to describe kind of the ideal like tech integrating teacher with regard to assessment like this, it would be somebody who is comfortable with a range of tools or comfortable learning a new tool, and who is looking at the assessment and saying, what is the absolute very best possible way my students could communicate their learning about this, their understanding or their skill? And then saying, okay, so what I want is, this, something very audiovisual. I wish I could hear what they were thinking. I wish I could see what they were doing. Whatever it is that the kind of ultimate best possible way for them to communicate their learning is. And then they're looking at their range of tools and saying, do any of the tools that I have allow me to do this thing that I really want to do? Or can I find one that will let me do what I want to do? And if they look at their range of tools, and that includes, analog tools, and say, yeah, the best possible way to do this is through an essay, or the very best possible way to do this is through, an in-person speech in the classroom, or the very best possible way to do this is through, a movie that, integrates an animation and, pieces to camera and all that kind of thing. And then they make the decision on how they're going to do it based on that ultimate goal of what it is they want the students to communicate that they learned. And then they go through the process of planning that assessment in exactly the same way, whether or not they're using technology or not. So one of the problems that we sometimes see teachers running into is, teachers who are comfortable with technology, is they'll say, for example, what I want to assess is my students' ability to use persuasive language. And so I'm going to have them create an iMovie where they're going to make an advert, for example. And then they forget everything that they would normally do to teach persuasive language and build to an assessment with scaffolding and, with examples and rubrics and all the rest of it. And they just give the kids an iPad and iMovie, and then they're surprised when the product doesn't really meet the goal that they had. The kind of ideal technology integrating teacher remembers that you still have to teach all that stuff, and all that's changed at the end of the day is the medium that the child is using to communicate with you. They don't need less teaching. They need exactly the same teaching, and and a little bit of different teaching because it's a different tool, than the paper might be, or than the speech might be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that we've found with working with teachers just in general in pedagogy, especially when we think about with project-based learning, because the same kind of things happen, we feel like teachers think, oh, well, I'm going to have them do this project. And they seem to, there's a myth and a criticism that I joke about it as being free range chicken, that you're just going to let them kind of go and then see at the end what they've done. And I say that's just a recipe for disaster. But one of the planning forms that we have has three columns. So when we have a driving question, which clarifies our product, purpose, and audience, then we say, what are the things that the students need to know and learn in order to do that? And that should be designed with content being part of that the teachers designed the project or the driving question to necessitate the learning of the knowledge that they're after in that unit or whatever. But then what is interesting is that the second column and the third column, the second column is here's how I'm going to teach it, which is that scaffolding piece, the direct teaching or whatever that might be. It could be anything from analog to digital and anything in between. But then how am I going to assess it, and what are the students going to do so that I can assess that they've understood it? Because if it's worth teaching, it's worth assessing. And that relationship, while it's not always quite that linear, because like you said, we want to be teaching several things at the same time and spiraling, and it's not exactly, step 1, step 2, step 3. We find that sometimes teachers look at that and it's sort of like, oh, that makes sense. I hadn't thought about that. And like, how would you not teach this stuff? And well, first of all, identify what you need to teach and scaffold, then teach it and think about what's the best way to teach that, and then assess it. And I think it's a really interesting lesson to take away, is that the noise of anything like a tech tool, which especially for somebody who doesn't have a tech integration mindset, that can feel like a big ask, and the learning curve is so steep that they forget the sort of principles of good teaching and learning.
I think part of that is about slightly shifting the order of how you think about that, from like you said, what is it that I want them to learn? And then for us, then the next question is not how am I going to scaffold? It's how am I going to assess? Because if you don't know where your destination is, how do you plan the journey? For me, that comes first, to say, okay, this is what I want to teach. This is how I'm going to know if they did it. And what am I going to have to scaffold and plan to get them to that destination?
And that was an excellent reminder, Sarah, because I was going to say is that following that understanding by design approach, where you are thinking about assessment first and foremost, it also informs what you're going to look at throughout the process to make sure that your kids or your students are headed in the right direction. How are you going to do that? How are you going to do those formative assessments of quality if you don't actually know where you want the students to be at the end of the 6-week unit, or even at the end of the lesson? And if we want to move back into the classroom, maintaining that less is more kind of mindset, then we really, most importantly, need to be thinking about what's the purpose of this and what assessment am I going to do? Because teachers come in with lots of ideas, lots of nice things that they want to do. But if we ask that question and we go back to assessment and we go back to the purpose of all this, we'll be able to really sift through some of those activities to find, okay, what's the real quality learning engagement that we're going to do here? And are we going to give it time so that it has depth to it, so kids can really have time to consolidate their understanding?
Right. So I want to make sure that we spend a little bit of time thinking about the bigger macro piece, because we've talked about sort of the granular pieces of teaching and what might be in a classroom, whether that's virtual or not. But you do spend a fair amount of time, and I think do a nice job of thinking about sort of the macro, the leadership, the running, or thinking about technology integration and resources and spending of money and infrastructure from a school or a district perspective. And that's a really challenging thing. I mean, I remember the excitement of having a smart board, and I don't know how much money our district, when I was in the classroom, spent on smart boards, and I loved it. But then again, there were lots of people who either didn't engage with it particularly effectively, but had them in their classrooms anyway because, well, you can't provide a smart board for one teacher without the other teachers, which I'm not sure if I agree with that, but I get the logic there. But now I think those smart boards are, for the most part, somewhat obsolete in lots of cases. And so what do we do with all those things? And how do you keep those things updated? And, like 3D printers, is that a good expenditure of money? Which is a different kind of conversation around technology integration, because I do think it's a little bit different way to think about it. But what are the sort of big picture takeaways or recommendations that you'd say for school leaders and district leaders when they're thinking about technology integration?
One thing that you just reminded me of, though, is I wonder, like you said, one teacher gets this smart board, so we buy them for all the teachers because we have this money and we need to be showing that we're integrating technology, so we need to have resources. And while I'm not saying that's exactly how it played out, I could imagine something similar to that does happen in different districts. And I just wonder, and one thing that I would say to leaders around the world in schools is that when you can, take a step back, and before you dive into any one tool or any one platform or any one idea related to technology integration, is to test it out. Take a small group of teachers who are willing and excited and run a test. Give them the tools that they need, give them the support that they need, and see what happens over a certain length of time. And then you can make an informed decision about, okay, is this something that we want to hang our hat on and we want to carry through for the next couple of years? Let's say going one-to-one or buying into Apple products or different products. Or from what we've seen, is this not where we want to head? Is there a different path we want to go? And I sometimes wonder why, or maybe a lot of that does happen, I'm not sure. But oftentimes I feel like in education, we get so excited about maybe having this money or this opportunity to buy something that we jump in a little bit too soon. And maybe it's best to spend a little bit of that money to test something out before we kind of throw everybody in that basket.
And I think part of it is that, for example, the smartboard thing is a great example, because I think like the smartboard PD that happened, and smartboards have become this kind of symbol of obsolete technology and kind of unnecessary technology spending. But it's part of our whole big message is that how are these decisions being made? And how involved is the whole educational system in making the decisions, So if, in our opinion, leaders shouldn't be making decisions about what technology is going into classrooms without a kind of collaborative community discussion that includes all of the elements of the model of, how is it going to be used in the curriculum? How are we going to lead for it? How are we going to provide professional development? What is teaching going to look like? How is it going to be enhanced by this product? What is the long-term repercussions of having this? For example, schools who go, one-to-one and all of a sudden have a bunch of Chromebooks, what work is being done there to make sure that everybody's on the same page in that school about why we have the Chromebooks, how we're going to use the Chromebooks, how are we going to teach with them, how are we going to assess, what's the bigger purpose? And then on the more kind of resourcing level, do we have the infrastructure to handle the Chromebooks? Will our internet hold up? How will the teachers get a hold of it? What if they need support, which they will, a bunch? And part of the problem that we had at our school, that we see in having in all of the other schools, essentially, that we've worked with, is that these conversations happen in isolation. Leaders talk to leaders, teachers talk to teachers, curriculum coordinators talk to curriculum coordinators, IT directors talk to IT directors. And so we have this lack of joined up thinking, and that's why we have problems then with integration. That's why you end up with, a bunch of smartboards not being used, because that whole school framework thinking didn't happen before decisions were made.
And I think it's important within that, when you facilitate those conversations, you're also helping to develop a greater sense of appreciation and understanding within the whole organism that is a school. Oftentimes, tech people, I'll say, within a school may not have the educational background that teachers do. And so within that not knowing kind of how a classroom works and what the stresses within the classroom are and what the opportunities are, can create a disconnect between people, and it can become a barrier. But facilitating conversations that cross all of these different groups that are involved or should be involved in these types of decisions also helps to build transparency about what people do and why they're doing what they're doing, which then generates a much greater sense of appreciation and understanding for all the different roles and all the different capacities that exist within this.
Yeah, the recommendation or some of the work that we try to engage with sounds similar in that we call a PD, alignment and refinement cycle. So we try to clarify, again, that purpose. Usually it's a mission statement, and unfortunately many mission statements are not particularly well written or used, and so it kind of begs the necessity of examining that and thinking through that. But assuming it is good, then we like to lean into the inquiry and say, let's turn that mission statement into a mission question and unpack what do we need to know and learn and do in order to sort of reach that. And we think that, very similar to a PBL process. What's the vision? What do we want it to look like, sound like, and feel like, ideally? And then what are our actions? What are we doing that supports that? And all of those conversations, I think, when we talk about project-based learning, again, we recommend that kind of process where you're democratizing and having those conversations with those teachers and the various stakeholders, saying, let's make sure we're all pulling in the same direction, so that when we're pulling, we're doing that in a meaningful way. And I think that's what I'm hearing you say is the same thing needs to be happening with technology and technology integration. Because it is not just about devices, it's not just about infrastructure, it's not just about resources, but it's also about understanding of teaching and learning and the purpose, as you said. I'm wondering if you feel like, when you talk about expenditures of money, and that is a big, I guess, challenge for our leaders and leadership, and it's not one that I think many teachers really have an appreciation for, because it's a hard decision to try to predict the future of, well, this device or these devices are going to be something that will be useful for a long period of time, and that they're going to be physically able to handle the load of being around, kids are rough on things and all that kind of stuff. But I'm wondering if there is a sense of, or if you have a recommendation when you think about expenditures of dollars, and certainly not an exact number, but like, would you say more money it's better? It would be better just to spend money more on pedagogy with an idea through the lens of technology integration, or more money on the resources in infrastructure with some meaningful pedagogy, I guess, training or thinking around that? Or is that even a helpful distinction?
I think context there is super important. We all exist within schools, and while schools, yes, are very similar, they're also incredibly different. When we think about public versus private, when we think about a school district that exists within the States to an international school district, when we think about different countries and the infrastructure that exists on a country level as different than a school level. So I think when we talk about, where to put funding, how to organize that, I think it really comes with inventorying your context really honestly and being really honest about what exists within your school. If you have a set of teachers where the pedagogy is really strong, that may make a difference for you. If you exist within a country, within a school where you have the resources and the infrastructure is there and it's working, well, then that of course would change how you organize your budget. But I think to start with, you've got to be really clear about what each of these pieces within the Intechgrate model mean within your context, and then be really honest with yourself about how well is it working to support the learning of the students. And then from there, I think you can have a conversation about the money that you have and how you spend it.
And I would say, in the final chapter of the book, in chapter 10, we do provide some resources for thinking about that, kind of thinking about force field analyses, about what are the factors driving and hindering development in the different areas of the Intechgrate model. But I would say as well that in general, when it comes to spending on technology, I don't think there's any such thing as a one-time technology investment. You have to be thinking sustainably when you think about technology, because realistically, the lifespan of any device in a school setting is not going to exceed 3 years. It just isn't. So if you spend a bunch of money on Chromebooks or iPads or whatever else, you need to think, how am I going to afford to replace these in 3 years when I have to, maximum 5. So the amount of money in that sense, however much you have to recognize that certainly the initial outlay on technology will be higher, because you might only need to buy, your charging cabinets one time, all these charging cables, but every single time that you need new devices, cases change, the device changes size, you need a new case, you need to upskill the teachers again, you need to be working on curriculum development. It's an ongoing process. And I think part of the mistake that schools sometimes make with resourcing and funding is saying, well, we're going to spend this money now, and then we'll just kind of see how it goes. And they don't actively put a plan in place for refreshing and for continuing to develop. And that has a big impact on teacher mindset, because that's when, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years down the line, when teachers start complaining that the devices don't work anymore, they've lost all the Y keys, the internet doesn't keep up with demand. And that's when they start to lose heart, and they start to think there's no point in me doing this because it doesn't work. It lets me down every single time. And then that has a huge impact then on pedagogy, of course, because all of these things are interdependent. They affect each other. So sustainability is a key takeaway there, I think.
Yeah, it's a difficult, I guess, conundrum to be in, because it's hard to predict. And as you think about the way in which people engage with technology, and I would say this is true of many different sort of initiatives, if you don't set it up for being successful especially in the early stages, those teachers who have a bit of a resistance, especially to technology in this case, if they don't experience success, or on the flip side, if they experience the struggles that we're all familiar with. I mean, as we tried to connect here, we were trying to use one platform and that didn't work, and so we had to shift gears, and the three of us were willing to do that. But lots of teachers would say, yeah, I'm just done with this, and I'm going to just give these kids a worksheet and make it easier. So you've got to make sure that they can experience some success to then move forward. And that kind of brings me back to the mindset. And one of the things that you mention in the early part of the book is and I'm curious, do you see a different kind of mindset from elementary to middle school to high school age teachers, and any preschool and or post-secondary as well, if you want to speak to that? Then also, and you mentioned this at one point just briefly in the book, is gender, and how you might see mindsets be different with male teachers and female teachers.
I mean, I can say from my own experiences that I can't actually put a sweeping generalization on any one category of people within the primary school, which is where we work very closely. I've been very impressed with the efforts that have been there by some, and not surprised by others. And that's been through the whole school, all different grade levels and from different age levels. And I've been really impressed with some of the commitment and the willing to take risks that I see in some of our older staff members that I don't see in our younger, and vice versa. And as far as the secondary goes, it's the same thing exists there. It's just, I think when we get back to teacher mindset, that's so individual individual that there really isn't one category of people that I could say is an absolute no or an absolute yes. I will say that in my experiences of running workshops, early childhood teachers, and I am an early childhood teacher, and I am, that's where that's where my heart is. They have, I've noticed, have very strong opinions about the welfare and the well-being of the children within their classroom. And they are very critical and skeptical of new initiatives, I'll say, or new ideas, because they really want to protect their children. That's where it comes from. And so when we talk about technology with early childhood people, I'm often trying to help them understand that it's a tool, and it's a tool that we need to think about in a way that could enhance the way we communicate, or that can enhance the way we collaborate. And for them, so within that, the only category of people that I would say I've had to work extra hard with is with those that are within early childhood. And again, that's not everybody at all. But that would be, if you ask me, that would be the one category where I've had to really, and this is where it's been really great though, because I've had to really reorganize my thought, and I've had to really think much deeper about what I believe is the way we should go with technology in the classroom for the early learners, because they require that of me, because they're not going to just take anything, so to speak.
I think one of the big differences as well between primary and kind of, I think in terms of secondary, but middle school and high school, elementary, middle school, high school versus primary, secondary, is that it's not so much to do with technology competency or capacity, but that elementary teachers, because of the nature of the way that they teach, are more open to this kind of collaborative, interdisciplinary approach that we talk about in the book, because that they teach multiple subjects themselves anyway. I think secondary teachers have a harder time with that, partly because of the structure of how high schools and middle schools are structured. It's not that easy to collaborate with other teachers. It's so heavily timetabled. They have so many students and all the rest of that. So I would say that is one of the differences I've seen in how they use technology. Is it tends to be an awful lot more disciplinary and a less interdisciplinary when you're kind of going further up the age groups. But I also just wanted to come back to that thing you mentioned about gender. Because our experience with gender, I would say, has not been that there's a difference between how men and women are in terms of their mindset. That was more a piece that in terms of the literature about digital natives versus digital immigrants, which, you've heard of, obviously, and a lot of listeners might have heard of. There's a kind of, there's a portion of literature, and there's a lot of people who think that if you were born before a certain time, you are a digital immigrant, and after a certain time you are a digital native, and that means that there's no way around it. If you were born in the internet age, you're going to be good with technology, and if you were born before the internet age, you're going to be bad with technology. And what a lot of research shows is that's not the case. It's got to do with a lot of other factors, including, for example, gender. Age is a factor, but it is not the factor. It really depends a lot on who you think you are, about that mindset in the deepest sense, that when we think of ourselves as not being techie people, we kind of give ourselves that excuse. It's exactly the same as saying, I'm not a maths person, I'm just not good at maths.
Right.
But
I'm not creative.
I'm not creative. Yeah, you could be. But by thinking of yourself in this fixed mindset way of saying, I am fundamentally a person who is bad at technology, therefore there's no requirement for me to learn because I've decided that I can't, And so that's what it's really got to do with this kind of where the mindset comes from. Is not when you were born, but whether or not you have that sense of self-efficacy and empowerment to say, I can learn this, I can do that. Maybe I'm not techie yet, but I could be.
Mm-hmm. And that for me connects to us as teachers within the classroom when we think about when we're integrating technologies, to remind ourselves that just because the students may have the vocabulary around the different devices and they may have an understanding of what it is and how to use it, it doesn't mean that they're actually able to apply that to use a tool well for the desired purpose. There's still a lot of teaching and learning that needs to be happening around how to use different devices, how to support the purpose for the learning with the students as well. Just because they may be a digital native doesn't mean that they have the wherewithal, the understanding, or the concepts to choose tools to support the purpose of whatever the task may be.
Right. Well, I'm mindful of time, and I think there's lots we could talk about. I think the folks who are looking to be more thoughtful and reasonable and purposeful in their integration of technology and just teaching in general, I think would benefit from this book. So I recommend that folks would check it out. And to that end, I want to make sure you have some time here to share links and any resources and any favorite tech tools that we've talked about a couple of them, but anything else that you'd like to share, feel free to do that as well.
Well, I mean, go ahead, Katierose, you do it.
Go ahead. Just go ahead, Sarah. I'll follow.
No, you do it.
I just wanted to say that, we're very aware of the fact that, yes, we have things that we like to use, but also that we're always interested in hearing about what works for people. And right now around the world, the most interesting thing for me is seeing how much sharing is actually happening through different platforms, whether that be Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, of different resources and tools and ideas, all for the main purpose of supporting student learning. And I really hope that as we move out of this phase of the crisis, that level of sharing and that level of compassion continues within our field, because it's just been amazing to see the ideas that are out there. And so what I want to say to listeners is that, yes, there are people in the world who have knowledge about technology integration or have ideas about inquiry, and you should follow those people. But trust in yourself that you are also doing amazing things within the classroom, and to not shy away from sharing your ideas and your thoughts and your lessons and your plans and the different ways that you do things, because that also has worth.
Well, how am I supposed to follow that now with links?
I don't know.
That's not helpful.
That's why I said, let me follow, but you didn't want to.
Well, all right. Well, I'll share our thoughts. You can buy the book at the Heinemann website. Is probably the best place to get it. They have some fantastic discounts, and right now they're doing free shipping on their books to try and help teachers to, upskill and keep learning while we're in the middle of this crisis. So if you go to Heinemann Publishing website, you'll find us there. A short link would be if you do hein.pub, that's HEIN.pub /integrating technology. That'll take you straight to the page where our book is. But it's also for sale on, everywhere where you can buy books, like Amazon and Barnes and Noble and places like this.
Okay.
You can get in touch with us through our website, which is www.intechgrate.eu, and that's spelled INTECHGRATE, like Intechgrate.eu. And you can find out more about our business there. We do consulting and workshops internationally for teachers and schools who need support with technology integration. And we also have a podcast of our own, called EDU Podcast, and that's EDYOU podcast.com. And that's where we talk about education research and classroom practice on a bunch of topics that just really interest us, like word walls and homework and screen time. So you can check us out there.
Okay. Social media?
Yep. I like to tweet. You can get me at S_J_Gilmore. On Twitter, and we have also an Intechgrate Facebook page. We have a book club Facebook group for readers of our book. You can find that by searching for Intechgrate Book Club. And our podcast also has a page and a group, which again you can search for at EDU Podcast.
Okay. Katierose, any social media you'd like to share?
All of those, and you can contact me via Facebook, Katierose Deos, and then on Twitter at Deos Katierose.
Okay.
Love to hear from you.
All right. We'll make sure to, again, share a bunch of these links, hopefully all of them in the show notes. So it's always, like I said, frustrating. iTunes is where most people listen, according to the stats that we see. But as far as I know, when we publish links there, they're not clickable. So you'll have to go to wegrowteachers.com or teachthought.com and search for this episode, which actually, now that I'm thinking of it, you are going to be our 200th episode. So I guess that means something. I'm not sure.
Yeah, exciting.
All right. So yeah, I'll make sure to put those links in there. And any other parting shots you want to share with folks and well wishes for the coronavirus isolators?
Yeah, well, we wish you the best of luck, especially those teachers who are trying to teach with small children. I've got a 9-month-old and a 2.5-year-old, and I am losing my mind. So I'm thinking of all of you out there.
I think too, just one thing that we could share is through our Facebook pages as well. We are also trying, as Sarah said, it's been a little challenging because we also have school-aged and small children at home, but we've been trying to just kind of create short tutorials about different ways that you can provide feedback, support the communication, the collaboration piece with students, different platforms, just trying to create a bunch of these tutorials to try and help people navigate these new waters, if that is new waters for you. Right. So have a look out for those as well.
And we're going to have a webinar coming soon on feedback during distance learning.
Wow. Okay. Well, thanks again so much for connecting. I'm glad we could talk through some of these things, and hopefully it's helpful to the folks who are listening as they're trying to navigate this post-coronavirus world.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
That'll do it for today's podcast episode. Thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget to review us and share us on your network so we can grow our audience to better meet your needs. Also, don't forget to find us on our websites, teachthought.com and wegrowteachers.com, as well as our various social media outlets.